This is Land of Havilah, 1 Kings 22b. Jehoshaphat and Ahab consulted the 400 prophets. All the prophets agreed that Ahab would have success at Ramoth-Gilead, except Micaiah. Only he predicted disaster. Which of the prophets will Jehoshaphat believe, Micaiah or the 400? Verse 29. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat the king of Judah went up to Ramoth-Gilead. Comment: Jehoshaphat believed the 400. He and the army of Judah will participate in the attack on Ramoth-Gilead. Verse 30. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself and go into the battle, but you put on your robes. The king of Israel disguised himself and went into the battle. Comment: It seems that Ahab is treating Jehoshaphat like a fool. Ahab's going to disguise himself in the clothing of an ordinary soldier, but he wants Jehoshaphat to wear his royal robes into battle as a decoy. Will Jehoshaphat agree to that also? We must be very careful of our associations and agreements. 2 Corinthians 6:14, quote, Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers, for what fellowship have righteousness and iniquity? End quote. Coming up, the king of Syria is going to issue an unusual command to his charioteers. Verse 31. Now the king of Syria had commanded the 32 captains of his chariots, saying, Don't fight with small nor great, except only with the king of Israel. Comment: The king of Syria has commanded his charioteers to home in on Ahab and not to fight with anyone else. It seems as if this strategy will endanger Jehoshaphat in his royal robes and keep Ahab safe, unless Yahweh makes something unusual happen. Verse 32. When the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, they said, Surely that is the king of Israel, and they came over to fight against him. Comment: As we expected, they're attacking Jehoshaphat by mistake. Still in verse 32. Jehoshaphat cried out. Comment: Psalm 102, verse 2, the psalmist said to Yahweh, quote, Don't hide your face from me in the day of my distress. Turn your ear to me. Answer me quickly in the day when I call. End quote. Jehoshaphat has cried out to Yahweh, and he needs a very quick answer. Verse 33. When the captains of the chariots saw that it was not the king of Israel, they turned back from pursuing him. Comment: Amazingly, in the clamor and confusion of battle, the captains of the chariots had a moment of clarity. Somehow they recognized that this wasn't Ahab. In a parallel account in 2 Chronicles 18:31, quote, Jehoshaphat cried out, and Yahweh helped him, and God moved them to depart from him. End quote. So Jehoshaphat was saved. But as for Ahab, verse 34, a certain man drew his bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the joints of the armor. Therefore he said to the driver of his chariot, Turn your hand and carry me out of the battle, for I am severely wounded. The battle increased that day. The king was propped up in his chariot facing the Syrians and died at evening. Comment: When Ahab was shot by a random arrow and it happened to find a joint in his armor, he commanded his chariot driver to take him off the battlefield to a location where he could watch, quote, facing the Syrians, end quote, probably some spot on a hill. Eventually he wasn't able to stand, so they propped him up and he kept watching. He lived the rest of the day and died at evening, and we wonder while he was slowly dying if he contemplated his life of idolatry and mixed devotion to Yahweh. Surely he thought of the nameless prophet who told him on the road, It'll be your life for Ben-Hadad's life. Still in verse 35, the blood ran out of the wound into the bottom of the chariot. A cry went throughout the army about the going down of the sun, saying, Every man to his city and every man to his country. Comment: This is now the complete fulfillment of Micaiah's word that Ahab wouldn't return alive to Samaria, and that Israel will be scattered on the hills like sheep with no shepherd, and they should all just go home, quote, Let each return to his house in peace, as Micaiah said in verse 28. Now, a little bit too late, it's as Micaiah said it would be, quote, Every man to his city and every man to his country, verse 37. So the king died and was brought to Samaria, and they buried the king in Samaria. Comment: Now coming up the fulfillment of the word of the nameless prophet by the road, verse 38. They washed the chariot by the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood where the prostitutes washed themselves, according to Yahweh's word which he spoke. Comment: Thus Ahab's name will forever be associated with Naboth's murder and with prostitution. He was a prostitute because he had many gods, as a prostitute has many men. Yahweh said in the beginning of the covenant at Sinai, quote, "You shall worship no other God, for Yahweh, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God," Exodus 34:14. After much patience, Yahweh has finally exercised his jealousy on Ahab. Verse 39. Now the rest of the acts of Ahab and all that he did, and the ivory house which he built, and all the cities that he built, aren't they written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? Comment: the ivory house might refer to adornment of the palace in Jezreel or in Samaria. Verse 40. So Ahab slept with his fathers, and Ahaziah his son reigned in his place. Comment: Ahab's son Ahaziah reigned in his place. In Kings and Chronicles, we don't necessarily try to memorize all the kings' names because there are so many of them, with lots of them having so little information attached. But Ahab is a memorable exception. Now coming up for the first time in 7 or 8 chapters, the focus shifts back to the southern kingdom. The next verse is a step backward in time to the beginning of Jehoshaphat's reign. Verse 41. Jehoshaphat the son of Asa began to reign over Judah in the 4th year of Ahab king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 25 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shili. He walked in the way of Asa his father. He didn't turn away from it, doing that which was right in Yahweh's eyes. However, the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. Comment: as we said before, the high places might be devoted to Yahweh or, much worse, to foreign gods. Verse 44. Jehoshaphat made peace with the king of Israel. Comment: he made peace with Ahab, as we know. This came about 80 years after the division of the north and south. They didn't unite, they only made peace. Verse 45. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat and his might that he showed and how he fought, aren't they written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Comment: indeed, there will be 4 chapters about Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 17 through 20, where we learn that Yahweh chastised Jehoshaphat for helping Ahab. Quote, "Should you help the wicked and love those who hate Yahweh?" 2 Chronicles 19:2. Now, still with respect to Jehoshaphat's reign, verse 46, the remnant of the Sodomites that remained in the days of his father Asa he put away out of the land. There was no king in Edom, a deputy ruled. Jehoshaphat made ships of Tarshish to go to Ophir for gold, but they didn't go, for the ships wrecked at Ezion-Geber. Comment: Ezion-Geber was a port on the northern end of the Gulf of Aqaba, which gave access to the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. Jehoshaphat didn't learn his lesson after participating with Ahab. He went on to participate in a joint venture with Ahab's wicked son Ahaziah in the building of ships at Ezion-Geber, with the intention of sailing to Ophir and Tarshish for trade. His great-great-grandfather Solomon was famously successful in doing the same, 1 Kings 9:26. But Jehoshaphat's effort was a failure. The ships wrecked in or near home port. Yahweh informed Jehoshaphat that this was his retribution for partnering in the venture with Ahaziah, 2 Chronicles 20:37. Verse 49. Then Ahaziah the son of Ahab said to Jehoshaphat, "Let my servants go with your servants in the ships," but Jehoshaphat would not. Comment: apparently Jehoshaphat intended to rebuild the fleet, and Ahaziah wanted to participate in that as well, but Jehoshaphat refused him this time. Lesson learned. Verse 50. Jehoshaphat slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in his father David's city. Jehoram his son reigned in his place. Comment: now coming up, the text goes right back to events in the northern kingdom. Verse 51. Ahaziah the son of Ahab began to reign over Israel in Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat king of Judah, and he reigned 2 years over Israel. He did that which was evil in Yahweh's sight, and walked in the way of his father, and in the way of his mother, and in the way of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, in which he made Israel to sin. Comment: Ahaziah's mother was Jezebel, 2 Kings 9:22. He did according to his father Ahab, his mother Jezebel, and according to the first king of Israel, Jeroboam, meaning he led Israel in idolatry. Verse 53. He served Baal and worshipped him, and provoked Yahweh, the God of Israel, to anger. in all the ways that his father had done so. Comment: that's the end of 1 Kings. It doesn't seem to be a logical ending place, but no worries. The book of 2 Kings picks up right where 1 Kings left off with the reign of Ahaziah in Israel. So it's farewell to 1 Kings. Virtually all the comments on the Hebrew language come from the NET Bible translation notes. This is the map of 1 Kings 22b. Jehoshaphat's ships wrecked at Ezion Geber here. They never made it to Tarshish and Ophir, locations unknown.